purpose of the viewfinder is to help you guys work with composition. We've been working with composition, and that's the plan, placement, or arrangement of the elements in your art piece. Composition is so important to a piece of art. It's one thing that can't be changed. When you hold it close to the still life with your arm outstretched, it's like zooming in. And you can move it around, and the thing that you see through your little picture window, that represents what's actually going to be included. The orientation of your paper corresponds either landscape or portrait to the way that you hold that viewfinder. Sometimes a much more interesting composition is one where you've zoomed in on just a small portion of the still life. I had someone zoom in just right here on the bottom of the basket and the grass, and it was a fantastic composition. In a minute, I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to give you guys a challenge of blocking in your composition. We're still working with observation, so you're going to be drawing what you see. After 5 minutes, you might decide that you don't like your composition and flip your paper over and try again. I'm going to demonstrate quickly how I would think about getting my composition set up on my page and blocking in those basic shapes. I'm going to be drawing with a crayon so it's dark enough so you can see it. You're going to be sketching with a pencil. Start lightly. To start with the item that's closest to you. Don't start by lining right up at the bottom of your piece of paper. Move up a little bit on your page so that you have a little bit of room to breathe. Sometimes people start in the back and everything gets squished off of the front. I'm going to be thinking about proportion. That's the size of the parts as they relate to one another. And I can see that the size of the pot is about 1/3 of the entire plant, and so 2/3 of this form is made up by the chrysanthemum, the plant, and 1/3 is made up by the pot. So if I start right here on my page, I'm just going to do basic shapes. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to be able to tell that 1/3 of my pot, if this is then 2/3, I'm going to be able to put in a basic shape. I'm going to use sort of a curving, round shape to represent that. Over here, I have a pumpkin, one of the tiniest pumpkins, and I can see, as compared to the pot for the chrysanthemum, which is going to be about the same width as it is high, the little pumpkin is about half the height of the pot. So on my paper, it should be about that same distance. And then over here, I have another pumpkin, but it's about the same height vertically as the chrysanthemum pot. So I know on my paper, it's going to be about like this. This is further away from me, and I've shown it higher up on the page. The ways that artists show the illusion of depth is by having objects overlap one another and by showing some things higher up, and that represents on your page that they're further back or further away from you, and will help to make your piece look convincingly three-dimensional. I'm also going to be sure to think about positive and negative space. Does anyone think that they know what the positive space is in the still life? Yes?
What space is good to draw and what space isn't good to draw?
No, that's a great question and good inference just from the way that we talk about positive as good and negative as bad. In art, it doesn't really mean that. It's a little bit different. The positive space is the stuff in the still life, and the negative space are the spaces in between or the airspace all around. This still life are the plants in the gourds. The negative space is the space in between. This is negative space in between the branches, in between the basket and the pumpkin, in between these two pumpkins. Artists know that if they look at the negative space and they draw that accurately, it will help them to get the positive space more accurate as well. If I draw the negative space between these two pumpkins and I get it the right shape, you see how it's kind of almost an hourglass shape there, where those two come together? If I get that the right width and height and shape, it's going to mean that I've drawn my pumpkins more accurately. Can you guys see that? That would be true? So you're not used to looking at the negative space, but when you're drawing, it's really important to remember to do that, because it will help you to get your proportions more accurate. I want to make sure that I have this negative space between the chrysanthemum pot and the pumpkin drawn accurately. Now, if I imagine that there is a grid, like this is another kind of viewfinder. I have a few of these, I'll pass them out. If I imagine that there's a grid that I'm looking through as I'm trying to set up my piece, it can really help me to plan the placement and the arrangement of where my lines are going to be. When I compare the top part of the chrysanthemum, it's about the same height as that basket. So I'm going to make that comparison on my paper. I'm going to move up about halfway down on the plant part, and that's where I see the bottom of the basket coming out on this side. And then I know that the height of the basket is going to be about like that. Now if I'm looking through an imaginary grid, I can see that this line isn't exactly horizontal. It's curving slightly upwards. Now how far do I go? If I had, let's say, a vertical line dropping straight down from the corner of the basket, it lines up not quite, but almost with the top of that pumpkin right there. So in my drawing, I know that I'm going to go almost that far with the edge of my basket. But I have another round shape to block in over here of the cabbage, and it's going to go actually right off the page. I'm just going to block in my grass. I know it's going to go way off the page. So I have my basic shapes blocked in. The basket with the grass, the chrysanthemum, my two pumpkins, and the cabbage. These basic shapes are what I'd like you to have blocked in after 5 minutes. Do you guys think this composition is strong enough? Should I keep it, or should I flip my paper and start over again?